Hello again. I'm back, and today we'll be discussing Cinder's toxic relationship with femininity via the lens of its relationship to power in her backstory. But first, a big thank you to my wonderful patrons for making these episodes possible. I have some readings linked below for those interested, so please consider this a more broad summary than an in-depth essay. So, first and foremost, when we meet Cinder, she is a femme fatale. The heels, the sultry voice and mannerisms, that general presentation of high-class, ladylike elegance. It's incredibly performative, of course, as becomes clear whenever she's around Salem, who just woke up like the dark queen who shall inspire devotion and despair, but it's still an ingrained part of Cinder's character, especially early on when she's trying to portray herself as powerful. Cinder is extremely feminine, and the more secure she feels in her power, the more she wants to convey it, and the harder she tries. The thing is, though, where did Cinder get this from? And what's toxic about it in Cinder's specific case as compared to, say, Weiss? Well, if you have ever noted the click, click, click of Cinder's heels and how they perfectly line up with Madame's, then you're on the money, because just look at the contrast between Cinder and her slavers. Cinder's compelled to keep her hair short, her clothes pseudo-androgynous and so lacking in colour that even her hair tie is bleached white. In contrast, her slavers, the ones who get to be people in the eyes of society and wield power, who victimize and abuse her, they are all intensely feminine, with long hair, deftly styled makeup, jewelry, pretty dresses, and even prettier manners. As is fairly common in many societies with these kinds of stratified binary ideals of gender, femininity is something to be performed at its peak by the upper class persons, and this isn't even really subtext, as an instance of Madame shocking Cinder has her chiding her slave with the words, "Now that wasn't very ladylike, was it?" Cinder spent years around very extreme presentations of femininity which were tied irrevocably with power and personhood and always persistently denied her, because it wasn't even just the above, it was the small malicious details too, indulging in a strawberry when you're not even hungry while someone else starves. It's having the time and the tools to present yourself as immaculately as possible and doing so because that's what power and personhood mean. It's how one presents themselves. Meanwhile, the slave can have none of it and is actively denied it along with their humanity. Thus, naturally, Cinder's idea of power is not big muscles or armour and scars, it's elegantly tailored dresses and soft smooth tones inlaid with menace that remind everyone I am the one with control. The fact she has essentially rejected everything about Rhodes's aesthetic, except the feathers which share his colour scheme, is also interesting to be sure. But back on topic, I imagine it is a surprise to no one that being taken in by Salem at some point would only serve to reinforce this mental image of what power and personhood look like. Cinder would have spent ages mastering everything from makeup to walkie-in heels to the silky voice and air of tranquility during her training, because she was aiming to have power, to have freedom and personhood in ways always denied to her. That's why, regardless of what her taste might have otherwise been, her entire relationship with femininity is inherently tainted and toxic. Because it's not about what she likes or wants, it's about the ideal of power she aspires to. I can only imagine she loathes it when her temper is fraying and her voice drops several octaves into something snarling and vicious. After all, that's not very ladylike now, is it? And because her inability to be a true lady was a bludgeon used to keep her down, it must burn. It must burn whenever she fails to maintain this carefully curated image that she wishes was her sense of self, but can't be due to the incredibly performative nature of it. RWBY makes for an interesting contrast on this front as well. Even ignoring the interesting point that RWBY blends a lot of traditionally feminine and masculine signifiers, a skirt, combat boots, a corset and bandoliers, plus with the new haircut, one can read a lot into Cinder's vexation with her beyond the obvious. But there's also the fact that both of them have modelled themselves after a maternal figure. But with RWBY it's done out of aspiration and maybe some projection. For Cinder it's rooted in spite and a desperate desire for that same power Madame once held over her. And speaking of modelling oneself after another, unsurprisingly, Emerald picked this up as well. It's more subtle, but as discussed in my Clothing Tells of Character video, Emerald's aesthetic and presentation became a lot more overtly traditionally feminine and femme fatale after meeting Cinder. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but by virtue of having placed herself, or more been placed in a subservient position while acting as such, Emerald was inadvertently mocking Cinder's entire sense of self-image about what defines a person and what defines power. Because in Cinder's mind, you can't escape the heel pressing down on your neck by any other means than becoming the one to wear it. And I think we all know where she learned that from. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for tuning in. Oh, and if you'd like to help out with episodes or commission 3D models, please swing by my Patreon or Ko-fi for scripts, early uploads, models, and more. For now though, thanks for stopping by.